much, especially also to Professor Chan Ewha, who I met before and who invited me. Thank you. Professor Chang has been saying in our meetings that it's important to ask questions. And I just wanted to start by telling you that when I was young, I was from a well-to-do family, and I asked a question that I continued to ask through my teenage years, and that was, why are some people poor and other people rich? And so some answers that I got for that was that, poor people were lazy, rich people were smarter, they worked harder, they were luckier. And I finally met an Italian Marxist professor who told me that rich people were rich because poor people were poor. That is, there's a transfer of wealth going on between one group and the other. And that was a real eye-opener for me, and then I married the Italian Marxist professor and moved to Italy, so I got more education there also. Now there's another question that is coming up in this period of time, and that is, are we a violent and suicidal species? Are we creating the end of life on Earth? And I think we all have to address that question, and I hope that through the idea of the gift economy, we can realize that, in fact, that's not the case, and that there is hope. I will just begin my speech by talking about that, how we do need a radical alternative to capitalism. Most people believe that the communist experiment failed, so they are looking elsewhere for models. And I believe we already have a model that exists everywhere, although we have been taught not to see it. And that model is mothering and being mothered, which are the central social interactions of childhood. And because that is necessary for children's survival, it's a cultural universal. It happens everywhere. Some suggest that evolution, through the adaptation of our species to sociality, hardwired our brains in ways that make us disadapted to the ego-oriented cultures of loneliness in which our competitive market economies have thrust us. Darcia Narvaez is a researcher at Notre Dame University, and she talks about the parenting practices that emerged with social mammals some 30 million years ago, and that mostly match up with common practices for infants and young children among foraging hunter-gatherers at present, that live in small, cohesive communities and that represent the lifestyle of over 90% of human genus history. These ancient child-rearing practices included extensive on-demand breastfeeding, constant touch, responsiveness to needs of the child, natural childbirth, and multiple adult caregivers. The multiple caregivers ensured support for the mother, a characteristic that is sorely missing in our society. Most hunter-gatherer groups are societies of generalized reciprocity where everyone gives to everyone. That is, they are societies of generalized nurturing and mothering, and Narvaez calls these companionship societies. In our market-based society, nurturing has mainly been assigned to the birth mother, who receives support only if she is lucky enough to have an available grandmother, or if she has the money to pay for childcare, or if she has a feminist husband. Narvaez says that the concept or the ideal of one mother burdens the mother in that she must be her own community of support and take all of the different positions that are dialogical positions that are meant to be held by other alloparents, that is the village. She has to substitute the village in her own person. So nurturing young children requires unilateral giving because although they actively and creatively receive, children cannot exchange. That is, they cannot give back an equivalent of what they have been given. Unilateral giving is the only way to make infants survive. Unlike most other mammals, they are born vulnerable and dependent, and they require intense unilateral care for many years. The unilateral identification and satisfaction of their needs by adults and children's reception of these need-satisfying gifts and services create the relationships of mutuality and trust that form the basis of later relations of community. In fact, giving and receiving is a kind of glue that holds communities together. Giving to satisfy the needs of another also gives value to her or to him. It implies the other is important to the giver and is registered in the self-esteem of the receiver. I call this implication gift value. As the child grows, her needs diversify and change. Sometimes she needs independence, and the mother has to be sensitive to this and to other psychological needs, calibrating her giving. Exchange changes this original logic. In fact, the doubling of the gift in exchange changes the relationship entirely from other-oriented to ego-oriented. The attention of the giver is no longer focused on the need of the other, but on the need or desire of the self. Gift value is canceled by the equal return and is transformed into exchange value, while after the exchange is concluded, the use value of the product is seen as a property of the object without human relational implications. Canceling the gift transaction in this way creates a whole area of life, the market, that functions according to exchange and exchange value, and is based on a quantitative equation between what is given and what is received. In this way, mothering, asymmetrical, unilateral giving is left out of the interaction. The main motivation of the market, profit, is actually made of gifts. Marx's idea of surplus value shows how the labor time of workers in excess of the amount covered by their salaries is captured by the market. This extra time is given free to the capitalist, but forced from the workers. To this we should also add free housework and care work that pass through the surplus value in that they diminish the monetary cost of reproduction of the workers and of all members of society. In fact, unremunerated labor in the home would add some 30 to 40% to the GDP in most countries if calculated in monetary terms. Although it's difficult to calculate it, that has been tried. We should add the gifts that are given by nature, then that are also unmonetized. In 1997, ecosystem services were calculated at $33 trillion as compared to global GDP of $18 trillion. These free gifts are not recognized as such, but they nevertheless unconsciously confer value on the receiver by implication. That is, they give gift value importance to the market and its protagonist, as well as to its values and thought processes. They collaborate in maintaining the dominance of the market over the gift economy. To the gifts that we just mentioned can be added the gifts that are extracted through the differences in level of life between countries, in that the livelihood of the worker costs less in developing countries than it does in the dominant capitalist countries. There is therefore a greater gift margin that comes from the gifts of women and of the developing society as a whole, which is monetized through the portion of the salary of the workers in the developed country, which is used to buy the imported product. Thus, the gifts of workers from both hemispheres flow towards the capitalists, but particularly towards those in the global north. Since most of the consumers in the global north buy on credit, the gifts of the future are also taken, as well as the gifts of the future of the environment. In fact, one more recent development is the commodification of the free gifts of nature and culture for water, seeds, fertilizer, and indigenous knowledges, and the seizure of those gifts by northern corporations. In this perspective, it is clear that the market is floating on and permeated by a sea of gifts. In fact, the market is a mechanism for channeling gifts away from the many and towards the few. It uses scarcity for leverage and creates the scarcity when too much abundance accrues, wasting enormous amounts on wars, financial market crises, and environmental destruction, all of which also redirect profits and gifts towards the few. The gift economy threatens the exchange economy because it is a more satisfying and meaningful way of living. If abundance existed for all, no one would willingly work for hierarchies of bosses. The exchange economy creates scarcity, dominates the gift economy, and hides its acts of plunder in order to render the givers compliant. If too much widespread wealth accrues, it is wasted on expensive wars and symbolic excesses, thereby ensuring scarcity. The market is anti-maternal. One, because it uses exchange instead of gifting as its method. Two, because it functions by taking the free gifts of labor and resources for profit. Three, because it cancels, discredits, and does not recognize or even see gift giving. And four, because it makes mothering difficult through the control and scarcification of resources and the isolation of caregivers from each other. Now I want to give you an idea of how I think this has happened and what the gender construction is that makes it happen. Patriarchal capitalism, or alternatively capitalist patriarchy, is a system where the values of competition, domination, and accumulation that are typical of patriarchy have merged with the market values of equal exchange for money. This system uses the misrecognized accumulated gifts of the many to leverage more gifts. It plays out the individual oppression and depletion of the weak by the strong on a social plane, repeating a structural relation of domination, patriarchal domination, at many levels, locally and globally. Competition for domination is the mode of operation of capitalist patriarchy. Exacerbated individualism and the insensitivity to needs are its typical characteristics. A misunderstanding and misconstruction of male gender seems to me the basis of this. In a process which I call masculation, little boys who are originally immersed in the economy of giving and receiving with their mothers are told they are not of the same gender category as she is. Consequently, they are expected to give up giving and receiving at an early age, and to take as the model of their category the father, who is usually not doing maternal gift-giving. They are thus encouraged to embrace a non-giving identity that often seems to function instead according to hitting, which is a sort of imitation of giving in which one person touches another to establish a relationship, but a relationship of domination rather than one of mutuality and trust. Not all males do this, but it has become a kind of macho ideal. Like this kind of constructed identity, the market also leaves out gifts and gift-giving. In fact, if something is exchanged, it is not a gift. Thus, the market is an appropriate environment for those who have rejected mothering and gift-giving. That is, for males who have given up the maternal way and embraced the mistaken model for their gender, but also for females who, in one way or another, reject the gift economy, or at least partition it away when they are at work. The market has an anti-maternal identity, while at the same time siphoning off the gifts of the many as profit. Paradoxically, work in the anti-gift-giving market is necessary for the maintenance of the gift-giving domestic sphere. The worldview and mindset of exchange, the exchange paradigm, eliminates gift-giving and mothering from the explanation of the world. It questions the existence of unilateral giving, or sees it as a moral or religious issue, saintliness or sacrifice. Instead, gift-giving is the basic human species-specific process. One of the reasons it is difficult to recognize gifts is that academia explains them as something else. It creates a blind spot so it just doesn't see them. Western philosophy is an attempt to explain the world without the mother. By eliminating mothering as an explanatory key for its own society, Euro-America also eliminated the understanding of the gift economy of the indigenous and matriarchal peoples that was based on generalized mothering. This made the Europeans and indigenous Americans mutually incomprehensible, and it was used to justify the oppression and slaughter of the indigenous people of the Americas and the seizure of their land. Similar blindness towards other cultures has been used to justify colonialism in all its various guises, including corporate economic colonialism. This alternative to capitalism, the alternative to capitalism is not communism. It is gift-based, matricentric feminism, matriarchal economics, caring economics, not a modification of capitalism, but an alternative to it based on a different logic. That's not the logic of recognition, but the transitive logic of the gift. The gift logic is not more primitive than the logic of exchange. It is what makes us human in the first place. The logic of exchange and the market runs counter to it, and this dehumanizes us. The feminist movement in the US and Europe, which showed so much potential for social change in the 70s and 80s, has in large part been dragged into the market and assimilated, perhaps just because of feminism's own rejection of mothering, aided by its aspiration to equality with men within patriarchal capitalism. Feminist thinkers have attributed women's specificity to a different standpoint and to a different voice or to the values of care. But they have been ironing out the wrinkles of sexism in Western thought when they should have been making a whole new set of clothes. This is beginning to be recognized. In her recent book, Confronting Post-Maternal Thinking, Julie Stevens argues that the present rejection of maternalism among feminists and others is strongly influenced by neoliberalism. I hope her book is part of the beginning of a swing back from the elimination of mothering from feminism that has gone on in Euro-America for the last decades. We should make giving and receiving, mothering and being mothered central in our interpretation of the world and create cross-cultural movements for social change based on that common basis. Although we're not all mothers, we all had mothers. So we've all been educated into that interaction based on gift giving. I'm not suggesting that we become hunter-gatherers, but that we learn from them and from matriarchal societies ways of creating the kinds of societies that, of the gift economy and generalized mothering. I'm also not suggesting we all become mothers, but that we, both males and females, recover the model of giving and receiving that guaranteed our survival as children. The task ahead of us now in capitalist patriarchy is to reveal gifts and gift giving where they have been canceled, disguised, or hidden, and to continue to connect them with mothering. Although academia is not the only or the main source of knowledge for many women, it has a strong influence and it sets the tone for much of the thinking of the general population. Therefore, it is worthwhile to challenge the anti-maternal mindset of academia. A first step is to understand mothering and being mothered as economic, a mode of distribution to needs, which is the independent basis of all other economies, whether gift economy, exchange economy, feudal, patriarchal capitalist, or patriarchal communist. All the other economies are merely variations on the theme of the maternal economy. The recent movement for the gift economy that has been inspired to a large extent by the free economy of the internet does not recognize any particular connection with mothering. A second step in challenging patriarchal thinking is to insist upon this connection. A third step is to take back an important aspect of philosophy and show that language itself is based on mothering. In my next talk, I will sketch a theory of language that is based on maternal gift giving. Since language helps define who we are as a species, reframing language as verbal gift giving and receiving will allow us to understand that humans are actually not Homo economicus, but a particularly maternal species that does unilateral nurturing, not only materially, but also verbally. We are not even just Homo sapiens, the knowing being, but we are Homo donans, the gift-giving and receiving being. And so we are not suicidal. We are life-giving and life-receiving, and we are totally adapted to this planet, but our economy is not adapted to this planet.
Okay, 선생님 감사합니다.